Stay tuned for tonight's adventure with the Fat Man.
Okay, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I hope it's good to be where you are, because I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Baltimore Fats, and this is Hey Arnold! Yeah, okay. So we're closing out our preliminary investigation, which will hopefully provide a good amount of context for us going forward. And I want to thank everyone who took this little journey with me. Hopefully the payoff will be there. So without further ado, I present the fifth tableau, the Madam and Cousin Dickie. All right, have fun, guys. All right, so we're getting closer to wrapping up our little bit of preliminary research into Mrs. Jarley and the history of waxworks by finishing our look into Marie Tousso and her time in England. Now, I've been referring to her as Tousso this whole time, but that's just to make it easier on myself, because she doesn't get that name until after she gets back from her European wax figure tour of 1794, in which I allege she deposited her friends, the French royals and others, into various safe locations throughout Europe. And so when she gets back to Paris in 1795, she's 34 and single and still rocking her maiden name of Grossholtz, which again may be a complete fiction because her father was most probably Philippe Curtius. But maybe even better, the name Grossholtz could be a clue to something else, because when I broke down the name Grossholtz, it literally translates as big forest. Gross or gross in German means large. In English, we turned it into gross, meaning a dozen, or 144, which of course if you add up makes it 9, right? But anyway, so we have that, right? But Holz is German for forest. So who Marie Grossholtz is she's Anna Maria of the Big Forest. The forest playing such a crucial role in the Mud City paradigm. From Howard's Woods to Sherwood Forest, it's impossible to ignore the pieces the puzzle tree is showing. Because not only does her maiden name mean Big Forest, she picks up the name Tousso when she marries the worthless Francois Tousso, who was allegedly a civil engineer with whom she has 3 children in 7 years, 2 of which survive. Now, there's not much out there on him, at least near the surface, but apparently he's such a drain on her that the peace between England and France in 1802, this Treaty of Amiens, which was a peace treaty brokered by the Bonapartes and the Cornwallises, by the way, and we've seen the part that they've played in Baltimore and Maryland and Mud City, right? I mean, it's just crazy. And so as soon as this treaty is signed, right, she's gone. She's packing up her wax portraits and she hits the road to England, and she never sees her husband again. Yet apparently she never divorces him and keeps his name. The gatekeepers paint him as such a non-factor. Why would she keep his name? Could it have anything to do with what the name may mean? Because I found this when I was trying to break down the name, right? It says 2S. 2S is the possessive adverb meaning you are or you have. And the Middle French O down here, right? That means power, mastery, dominion, or to rule. So Tousso quite literally means you have a ruler, or maybe your ruler. You know, this is a very interesting and convenient name for the maker of wax figures. Right? It's just too good to be true. It has to be on purpose. Right? Did she think this up? Did Marie come up with this? Right? Was this her design? Right? Because it's interesting that she would jettison her husband, you know, whose name now quite literally translates to your King of France, Francois Tousso. Francois, of course, just meaning France or French. Right? And so that's just really unbelievable. Is Marie Tousso trying to intimate that she actually married the King of France, or that she perceives herself some sort of queen? You know, maybe at least in the eyes of her wax figures? I don't know, but she was certainly very friendly with the royal family. And if there's anything to the idea of her helping them escape, then it seems possible. And maybe it explains why she never went back to her husband, because he never existed. And now there are alleged letters that she wrote to one Francois Tousso in her archive, 13 of them. You know, how convenient, right? And there's actually one written on Guy Fawkes Night, November 5th, 1803. So there is some attempt to legitimize her account of her marriage and who Francois Tousso was in the record. You know, and maybe we'll look into those letters down the line, right? But getting back to her move to England, this isn't something that was decided on a whim, right? She goes at the invitation of this guy, right? And this is Paul Philidor. and he was a magic lantern and phantasmagoria pioneer. And so we've talked about the magic lantern before in the episode about Holmfirth called Mud City Goes to Hollywood. But apparently this Paul Philidor invents the word phantasmagoria in 1790. Paul Philidor announces his show of ghost apparitions and evocation of the shadows of famous people as Phantasmagoria on December 16th, 1792. But it says here that Philidor had previously advertised his show as Phantasmarasi in Vienna in March of 1790. And now I wish I could do an episode on him. It would just start a whole other tangent. I could fill 3 or 4 episodes, I'm sure, on Phantasmagoria. But, this show was not well received in 1790. But just briefly, Phantasmagoria was a form of horror theater that used one or more magic lanterns to project frightening images, such as skeletons, demons, and ghosts, onto walls, smoke, or semi-transparent screens, typically using rear projection to keep the lantern out of sight. Essentially, it was the type of show that Houdini built his reputation debunking. But what's kind of interesting is that the gatekeepers have Phantasmagoria, or essentially what Phantasmagoria was, dating back as early as the early 1400s. Right? The earliest pictures known to have been projected with lanterns were death, hell, and monsters. Giovanni Fontana's 1420 drawing showed a lantern projecting a winged female demon. 1420. Right? And then we have Athanasius Kircher. Remember him? The Jesuit priest who looked like the dude's landlord, right? He took over for Kepler, kind of very much responsible for the theory of heliocentrism and so forth, right? Well, he warned of this practice in 1646. But of course, as with so much of this technology, there is a more ancient precedent. And that, of course, is Plato's cave, otherwise known as the allegory of the cave, in which prisoners would be chained facing the back wall of a cave, and then ghastly images would be projected onto the wall, and the prisoners would come to believe that the world outside the cave is filled with these monsters or whatever. Right? Plato used this as an allegory to explain the superior intellect of the philosopher, who of course knows the difference between shadow and reality. And I know that this story has made the rounds, right? There are a lot of great videos out there on this subject. All right, so this concept has been around for a long, long time, right? Or so they tell us. And it's very interesting that Marie Tousso would take up with this Paul Philidor character, with whom I'm sure she first met in the 1790s when he was coining the term phantasmagoria. But of course it makes sense. 2 forms of illusion and magic teaming up, one using the projection of shadows and images, the other a more subtle form of practical magic. But what's really interesting to me personally is where they start their partnership, and that's at the Lyceum Theatre in London. And it says here that she did not fare particularly well financially and slinks away to Edinburgh in 1803. And now this is just another illustration of how incomplete or misleading the gatekeepers can be. Marie doesn't go to Edinburgh with her tail between her legs. She and Philidor go together and start their tour of the United Kingdom there. But it all begins at the Lyceum. And so the Lyceum is a theater in London's West End, founded in 1765, and it's where Philidor and Marie Tousso set up their wax figure and phantasmaganza of 1802, right? And it's a spectacle specifically set up to deceive. Come see the lies at the Lyceum. I think this is interesting because before and to this day, Lyceums weren't built to be houses of entertainment, right? They're built to be houses of education. The Lyceum is a category of educational institution defined within the education system of many countries, mainly in Europe. The definition varies among countries. Usually it's a type of secondary school, or essentially like a high school. The wiki page is quite lengthy, but very specific on what lyceums are or are supposed to be. Places for higher learning or public meeting halls. And it's an institution that was started by none other than Aristotle. The Lyceum was a temple dedicated to Apollo Lycaeus, Apollo the wolf god, right? Who was best known for the peripatetic school of philosophy founded there by Aristotle in 334 BC. And so now it's interesting to me that this temple is dedicated to Apollo Lycaeus. So it's not Lyceum with a soft C, it's Lyceum with a hard C, like a K. And the root in Greek is for wolf. And this is interesting because it's one of Apollo's lesser known associations, being primarily known as a sun god, right? The unconquerable illuminator. But it's interesting also because a wolf devours. What's being devoured at the Lyceum? Is it the void of ignorance, as the narrative suggests? Or could it be something slightly more sinister? Like free will, maybe? I don't know. That may be overstating it a little, but this long Wikipedia page goes on to list some 28 countries that still call a number of their secondary schools lyceums. And so now the conversions of institutions of learning to lyceums really gets full swing in the 1800s, and in the United States it leads to something called the Lycam Movement. And so the Lycam Movement was a series of organizations which sponsored a variety of public education programs and entertainments. Which organizations sponsored which public education programs and entertainments? That's the real question here. Who was doing this? Because these lyceums were being set up all over the country. The likes of Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, among other learned men of letters and science, would travel and speak at these lyceums. It was essentially a self-contained lecture circuit. And after the Civil War, lyceums were increasingly used as a venue for traveling entertainers, such as vaudeville and minstrel shows. Perfect for such entertainments as your Mrs. Jarley's Waxworks. And this was going on all over the East Coast and the Midwest at the time, and Baltimore was no exception. I found 2 lyceums in Baltimore. The first was the Labor Lyceum here, which was more of a public meeting hall than a school, and it closed sometime in the 1920s. And the other is very much a school and allegedly still open, and it belongs to our old friends at St. Wenceslas, the St. Wenceslas Lyceum. Right, that's right. The Jesuits appear to still be running some form of program out of the Lyceum in Baltimore. And the best part? Where it's located. St. Wenceslas is a parish church of the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Baltimore, located in the Middle East neighborhood of Baltimore. Are you kidding me? These 3 words together? Roman Catholic, Baltimore, and Middle East? Does that mean Hopkins is in the Middle East? Because here we have the St. Wenceslas Lyceum here, and Hopkins is just a few blocks away right here. That's really unbelievable. Of course Hopkins is in the Middle East. So before we move on, I just want to close out on the Lyceum by noting this other similarity, and that's that in reconstructing what they tell us was the ruins of Aristotle's Lyceum, which we have here on the top, this was allegedly the Roman Lyceum that Aristotle taught at. And down below, they have a reconstruction of what they felt it looked like. And now, I don't know about you, that looks awfully familiar to me. Right? Doesn't it look like Stonehenge? Could Stonehenge really have been a Roman Lyceum? Maybe, maybe not. All I know is that dating Stonehenge to the Romans doesn't fit their narrative for whatever reason. So the Druids get the nod, some 3,000 years before the Romans are supposed to have been there. Now you tell me in the comments if you think these look similar. I don't know, but I need to move this story on to its next incredible connection, which begins with the manager of the London Lyceum when Paul Philidor and Marie Tousso begin their apparently ill-fated run in 1802. A man named Samuel Arnold. Right, the Lyceum managed by Samuel Arnold from 1794 to 1809. Now, I don't know about you, but when I saw the Arnold name, every fat sense I have went off like a fire alarm, right? It was a total...
Right turn, Clyde.
Because if you don't remember, Arnold was the maiden name of Elizabeth Arnold Hopkins Poe, Eddie's mom. It's unfortunate that I never got to Eliza here during the Poe Chronicles, and ironic, because it was with her that the research began. And I use that term loosely, right, because I don't really consider what I do research. But it was what I found looking at her that got me excited to do the Poe series. So who knows what would have happened, where that series would have gone, if Bewley didn't push her out of the way, me first style, the way that he did, right? But I feel confident in saying that I think this would have happened, that I would have found Marie Tousso, but just from an entirely different angle. The puzzle tree in motion. Because I most certainly would have found this if I started with Eliza Arnold instead of Bewley's genealogy. And that's this blog post here, right, written by one Undine, blogger of the grotesque and arabesque. Right, remarkably lifelike. I like that, right? And now I did not find this way back in August or September of 2020 when I first started looking at this. But back then, I felt I had connected Eliza Arnold up here to the Arnold family of Rhode Island. And they're the Eagle family, and that may be important down the line, I don't know, right? And they were a very powerful early American family that were the governors of Rhode Island for generations. And I was very excited about this connection. I was telling people about it, because I really felt it added an incredible angle to the mystery of Edgar Allan Poe. And I'm sure Mary remembers how bananas excited I was, but at the time, and until just now, I never imagined that I'd find this, right? And Undying writes, historians discount Edgar's own assertion that his mother was an illegitimate daughter of Benedict Arnold, right? Are you kidding me? Now, I had Benedict Arnold as his uncle back when I was first looking at things. I never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd learn that Edgar Allan Poe believed Benedict Arnold was his grandfather. I mean, that is just absolutely crazy. But could it be true? Let's take a look at what's known about Eliza, which is precious little. Even this painting here isn't her, right? It's just something that's become accepted as her image. All right, so Undying writes that in regards to Edgar Poe's mother, Elizabeth Arnold Poe, her mystery lies not with her death, but her life. It is a curious fact that the mother of one of literature's best known and most scrutinized figures is virtually an enigma to us. She was born in England, possibly in 1787. Her mother was also an actress named Elizabeth Arnold.
How convenient!
Who came with her daughter to America in 1796. We do not know the identity of her father. And so what we have here is a young ingenue actress with the same name, who gets knocked up and moves to America when this child is about 9 years old. And we have the manager of the Lyceum, named Arnold, operating in this time frame, managing the Lyceum after 1794, but you have to believe he was a part of the London theater scene well before, to get this gig as manager of the Lyceum. Right, so he's operating in this same time frame. And then we have the traitor, Benedict Arnold, enjoying his time away from the States. In the winter of 1782, he and his wife Peggy moved to London. He was well received by King George III and the Tories, but he was frowned upon by the Whigs and most army officers, of course, right, because he was a traitor, right? And so in 1787, he moves to Canada to a merchant business with his sons. And so now this puts Dickie and Sammy in London at the same time. Now on the surface, I couldn't find anything to indicate that they were actually related, but the Arnold family is huge, and there are many cross relations between who's related to who in the States and in England, right? It's absolutely nuts. So it would not surprise me if they were related, right? Just as it wouldn't surprise me if Sammy here uses his theater connections or perhaps even runs a stable of actresses that he sets up with players and we'll just call him his cousin, right? Like Cousin Dickie. And he sets him up with these actresses, like the young Elizabeth, married men though these players may be. And with the same last name and narrative vagaries, this Elizabeth Arnold could be anyone from Samuel Arnold's wife to sister or anywhere in between. But she gives birth to Eliza, Poe's mother, in 1787. Possibly, right? And that happens to be the same year that Cousin Dickie is getting out of Dodge, right? Perhaps there was an Elizabeth-sized bullet with his name on it, facilitating this move to Canada and his merchant business with his sons, right? Who knows? I don't know. But I certainly never expected the Arnolds to be playing such an important role in the story of Mrs. Jarley and Madame Tousso. But it makes sense that they would intertwine like the branches on the Mud City Paradigm puzzle tree should. And so before we close this one out on Marie Tousso here, I just wanted to show a little love to Arnold from Happy Days, right? Because, I'm now ever aware of this connection between Happy Days and this story here, and it had me thinking Arnold and then Cunningham, and Arnold Cunningham was the name of the main character in Stephen King's novel Christine. And here he is, so I don't know how much coincidence could be in that, and who Stephen King is and what he may mean to this story as well. But also, coincidentally enough, if you dare think it so, is that Arnold Cunningham is the name of the main character in the Book of Mormon, which is amazing considering the way the Mormons jumped into the story with Alexander Backey. It's just incredible to me now to have the names Arnold and Cunningham just be jumping all over the place the way they are. And so now after all of this, right, it's time to wrap things up with Marie Tousso, who, when we last left her, was getting ready to hit the road with Paul Philidor on their great UK tour of 1803. A little tour I've nicknamed Deception Road, right? Two masters of two different types of optical illusion, which will soon merge into one glorious monstrosity we call motion pictures. Because one thing that shouldn't be ignored or understated here is just how much Madame Tousso and Mrs. Jarley after her contributed to the concept of what we call celebrity today. Celebrity is a condition of fame and broad public recognition. Because when ads would run for Madame Tussauds Wax Museum or Mrs. Jarley's Waxworks, they focused on the visual expectation. Mrs. Jarley's Waxworks, who was there and how, right? So this is not only for the Baltimore socialites, but also for the tableaux and who was included therein. And I'm sure we'll get more into this as we go on, but creating this visual narrative, attaching images to history and the fantastic, mythological or religious reenactments, right? What it does is it creates an attachment to these stories and characters our controllers use against us to this day. And that's celebrity culture. And though fame was nothing new in the early 1800s, the idea of harnessing it was. And that really begins in earnest with Marie Tussauds and Paul Philidor's UK tour, Deception Road. And Marie Tousso is a road warrior, right? She tours England for, wait for it, 33 years! Are you kidding me? You can't make this stuff up. And you can't make this up either. In 1835, she opens her first permanent exhibition. Where? On Baker Street. Are you kidding me? Home to my boy Sherlock? You really couldn't ask for a better ending, and so this will wrap up my preliminary research for the Great Baltimore Waxworks of 1872. I'm super stoked, so make sure you stay tuned for the next thrilling episode of Baltimore Fat's House of Wax. It's about to get weird, I think. And so remember, guys, just because you don't know the truth doesn't mean you can't have fun with the lies. And until the next one, cheers.